Yeah.
Nick just asked me what the dirge was. Well, God, our help, he thinks maybe it should be a little bit faster when you do it at AM. So I would probably make the tempo. And I was going to ask you, is it going to be a fun concert? Because you're going to be playing the Philharmonic.
Yeah.
Is it fun
Yes.
stuff?
It's fun. Check out. Yeah, it's the
And then so it really worked out well that Patty is coming with this expert. So that worked out well. Yeah, I like it when things work out. Yeah, I could come. I do think the $500 a year. You know that. But yeah, I could actually come. It's at 7:30. Grace. I stopped coming because it was always so crowded. But I can walk with you. It's a little different.
to share God's precious love among us.
Would you please rise as you're able and join me in a call to worship? The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge.
There is no
Speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voices go out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In the heavens he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom from his wedding canopy, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them, and nothing is hid from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and it drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. But who can detect their errors? Clear me from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from the insolent. Do not let them have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
Will you pray with me? Goodness isn't always popular, Jesus. There are those who doubt that it has value, that fear that goodness only leaves us vulnerable and unable to navigate the complexities of the real world. But we believe that the opposite is true, that it is goodness that must ultimately prevail and that holds the key to the wholeness and happiness we seek. And so we pray for goodness to infiltrate every ungood place, where callous self-interest humiliates and impoverishes others, where casual disregard for the common good undermines security and neighborliness, where unexamined or overstated fear addicts us to control, where our obsession with the immediate blinds us to the consequences of our actions. Teach us the power of the good, the healing of the noble, the life of the praiseworthy, and capture our hearts that we may give ourselves to know your goodness, the only goodness that is truly worth pursuing.
As it was in the beginning, is high and shall be, world without end. Amen. Amen.
You may be seated. Welcome to the worship of God at First United Methodist Church, Santa Maria. What announcements do we have this morning? There's a registration card in the pew. If you are new, please fill one out. Or if you have things you want to know about, particularly, I forgot to mention this first service, if you're planning to be part of the book study and haven't let us know yet, please write that on one of the cards and turn it in with the offering so that we can have the right number of books. Yes.
I just wanted to mention the next 2 Sundays, I will have children's choir rehearsal CDs available. And then we start rehearsing. Children's choir will start the first Sunday in October, which is October 7th. So see me the next 2 Sundays to get your rehearsal CD, hot off the press.
Okay. Thank you. Activities this week. Showers of blessing tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock to noon. And chancel choir rehearsal every Wednesday at 6:45. What?
That's right.
Oh, yes. Tuesday night, church council at 5:30, finance at 6:30. And youth activities. Now, whether you are a youth or just young at heart, or wherever, today at Avila Beach, Jenny's got this from 11:30 to 3 p.m., which means she's leaving before service is over. And I told her I wasn't real happy with that, but she said, oh, well. Sorry about that. So anyway, this afternoon, youth service on Sunday, September 30th. The youth will be doing the worship service, leading the worship service. And then SSP, Sierra Service Project registration begins in October. And Jenny told us this morning that the price has gone up some, so the registration fee will be $60, not $50. And that she needs to be able to turn that in by October 1 at the latest. So if you have a youth who's planning on SSP, or if you have a youth you're planning to send to SSP, please let her know and get that deposit check in. And then on Sunday, October the 7th, along with the beginning of the children's choir rehearsals, SSP will have a blast-off bake sale. Jenny has been speaking with the best bakers in the church. So if she hasn't talked to you yet, don't worry, she will. If you're one of those people. And if you're not on that list, you'll be on the list of those who buy. So, upcoming activities. Short Stories by Jesus, our book study for the fall, starts next Sunday, September 23rd, looking at the parables of Jesus. And again, as I said, if you haven't let us know that you're planning to be part of that, please do so. You can come on Sundays at 4 o'clock or on Thursdays at 7 o'clock. Or you can mix and match, go back and forth as you need to. And confirmation class will start next Sunday after the second service. So if you have a child that's in that right age range, or if you are a child that's in that right age range, please be aware that that begins next Sunday. And then a week from Tuesday, September 25th, Board of Trustees at 7 o'clock. No Taco Tuesday this time. Darn. That was fun last month. Anybody who wants to get in on the next Taco Tuesday space on trustees, we could fit you into. So once again, welcome to worship. And will you pass the peace among yourselves? Peace of Christ be with you, also with you.
Surprise. Thank you for doing this. So none of the rest of us had to preach today. On a daily basis. Yeah.
This is the time to speak our joys and concerns. What joys do you have this morning? In the first service, Jimmy said that his surgery went very well. Of course, he mentioned that this was the same surgeon who did his neck and his back, so he knew things were going to go well. So Jimmy was back today, and he was playing the drums one-handed, because the other hand is kind of in a swing. But he was happy about that. And we had a couple birthdays in the first service, Allison and Noah. One yesterday and one today. What other joys do you have? Don't everybody speak at once. Ed's got one.
We're happy to have our son Jim Huell from San Ramon here for just for the weekend. We've enjoyed it very much.
Others? If not joys, do you have concerns? Oh, where? Okay.
And you're happy to have your son here with you. I'm just really thankful for my children and the help that they give us as we need it now.
Okay.
My sister Jennifer is in the hospital. She's been having some problems for a while, and then they finally knows that part of her aorta is torn, but it is treatable. But she's going to talk. She's resting comfortably now, but she's going to talk with her doctor Monday to see if surgery is necessary.
Okay, for Sister Jennifer in the hospital with surgery.
Having lived on the East Coast in Florida for many years, I lived through those disgusting hurricanes. And I think we need prayers for all those in the devastation area. Thank you.
For the East Coast hurricanes and devastation, flooding, God in your mercy.
I'd like to request a prayer for our town in the Philippines. They are all flooded with Hurricane Mangkhut. That's the name of that hurricane there, or Ondoy, that's the Philippine name of it. And the concentration of that big hurricane is in northern Luzon, which is where I came from. And the flooding is really bad, that up to, on the highest street there in my town is up to your chest. So it's flooding, all the crops are all ruined, and a lot of homes were devastated. A lot of people, there was no report of death yet, but we don't really know the extent of the trouble they have there. And I'd like to ask for prayer.
Okay, for the storms and the flooding in the Philippines, and that same storm is also moving into China, some of the most populous areas. Lord, in your mercy. Others.
I'm thankful that the Sounds of Hope Choir sings at the first service on the fourth Sunday. And that's my joy. My concern is that everyone would go to the first service next week.
Okay, for the Sounds of Hope, a prayer of thanksgiving. Lord, in your mercy. Any others? Let us pray. At the busiest corners of our lives, where our toes tap out a staccato of anxiety, our knees buckle from the weight of the doubts stuffed in our backpacks, Our hearts thud to the beat of despair in our earbuds. You stand. The faded signboard reading, "Who do you say I am?" chafing your shoulders, while little sister Sophia hands out ice-cold bottles filled from the aquifer of hope. And while the flashing red hand freezes us into place, you pick up those cobbled together pieces of grace, stepping firmly into life's flowing traffic, glancing back at us as if to ask, "You coming or not?" Lord, help us to come. Help us to make a commitment to you. Help us to follow you wherever you lead. We ask this and much more in the words which you gave to us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Now we ask that the ushers would wait upon you to receive your gifts and offerings.
Lord, it is a great thing that we can come together and give to you our joys and our sorrows and our hopes and our fears. And it is also a good thing that we can share all of the gifts that you give us with each other and with your church. And we ask your blessing today on all these gifts and on those who bring them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Let all the people praise thee. Let all of the people praise thy name, O God, forever.
Let all the nations bless thee. Let all the nations bless thee now, O God, and now before. Let every creature thee adore and spread thy truth from shore to shore. Let all the people praise thee. Let all of the people praise thy name, O God, forevermore. O God, have in ages past our hope for years to come, for shelter from the stormy blast and our eternal home. Before the hills in order stood, o'er earth received her fame. From everlasting thou art God, to endless years the same. Let all the people praise thee. Let all the people praise thy name forevermore. Let all the nations bless thee. Let all of the nations bless thee now and now before. Let every creature thee adore and spread thy truth from shore to shore. Let all the people praise thee. Let all of the people praise thy name forevermore. And praise thy name forevermore.
I'm reading from James, Well, all right. What are you doing?
I need 2
Oh,
volunteers.
that's right.
How about these 2 right here? To come forward. Don't worry, it's not hard. Well, it may be impossible, but
Well,
it's not
it's
hard.
impossible.
And Blair's going to read some, and then we're going to do something, and then we'll have her read some more.
Uh-huh. All right. From James. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships, though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. And the tongue is fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell.
Thank you. What we have here, is a tube of toothpaste. Now think of the toothpaste as words, and think of this as the mouth. And this is the lips. When the lips are shut, no toothpaste comes out. Okay? Which one of you would like to go first? Okay, good. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to squeeze out some toothpaste like it's words of hate. Keep going. There's plenty of words of hate around. Now squeeze some out like it's words of anger. Keep going. There's plenty more. How about words of defeat? Words of, you're not good enough. Okay. And we could continue with other kinds of bad words, couldn't we?
Yes.
Okay, now here's the easy part. I want you to take the spoon in the tube and put the toothpaste back in the tube. Keep going. You got a little left. What's so hard about it?
Once it's out, it cannot go back in.
Once a word is out of the mouth, it can't go back in? Right. Thank you. Go ahead, Blair.
For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature, can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species, but no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. And now from Mark. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." This is the word of the Lord. Be to God.
The last time I preached here, I said something to the effect that I was a substitute, sort of like when a window gets broken, you use a piece of cardboard for a substitute. After the service, one person told me, "You were no cardboard, you were a real pain." I'm not sure which way to take that. Words by themselves are neutral. It is how words are used or misused that gives them meaning and significance. Words can be used to hurt. They can be used to heal. Words can be used to build up or to tear down. Words can curse God. Words can praise God. Words can tear us down. Words can lift us up. How many persons commit suicide because they are repeatedly told they are worthless, that nobody cares about them, or even worse, that God hates them? How many persons are lifted up by words of well-deserved praise, by hearing a comment from someone about something which they had said or done, which perhaps they had no idea anybody had even noticed? Words can be spoken with complete sincerity, or they can be mouthed with almost totally obvious indifference, disbelief, or contradiction. How many of us can remember things our parents taught us when we were young? I have at least two from my mother, and I'll share a third one later. She had a saying, "What you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say." Another one was, "Believe half of what you see and nothing of what you hear." James tells his readers that those in leadership must be particularly careful about the words they use. He speaks particularly about teachers, but his words can be extrapolated to cover all those who use the spoken or written word to instruct, to convince, to lead. To be good leaders, we must have not just good words, but the best words. We are human, so we are not only capable of making mistakes, we do make them, perhaps many of them. As teachers, as leaders, we must be even more careful to make as few mistakes as possible. James writes, "So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. As one pastor puts it, we are still experiencing wildfires in the American West. At various times, there have been dozens of blazes consuming thousands of acres of tinder dry vegetation. Many of the fires were started by lightning, but more than a few were human in origin. A terrible perversion of the old campfire song, "It only takes a spark to get a fire going." But it took thousands of firefighters to put the fires out, and some of them lost their lives in the effort. As we preach on the destructive power of the tongue, we would do well to point to those wildfires in nature as a way of reminding our tongue-wagging congregations that the harmless fun of gossip can devastate an entire community. None of us is a follower in every single aspect of our lives. Whether it is from the pulpit, from a lectern, in a committee meeting, setting up for a rummage sale, preparing recycled materials to go to the recycler, whatever it may be, or simply as we are seen while we act or react to our particular circumstances, seen by our spouses, our siblings, our parents, our children, our neighbors. However, whatever, wherever, whenever, we are teaching, we are preaching, we are witnessing to who we are, to what we are, and to whose we are, by what we say, by what we do, by what we become. Obviously, this can be seen as a bummer of great proportions. On the other hand, it tells us that each of us has the opportunity to worship God, to praise those around, to speak words of encouragement to those who greatly need to hear them. I'm not saying be fake about it. I'm saying be real about it. Here's another one from my mother. She used to tell me, if you can't say something nice, say nothing. Maybe we should update that. No, don't write it on Facebook either. I took that so seriously, I stopped talking. Well, actually, that's not quite true. For some reason or other, they never did figure it out. I didn't start talking until I was about 4. Part of it, I think, was probably because my sister, who was 2 years older, I could point at something and she'd get it for me, so why did I have to talk? And the doctor told my parents after numerous tests, don't worry about it. When there's something he wants that he can't get without talking, he'll start talking. Well, I did. And I've been trying to catch up ever since. So I don't always stop and think about what I'm saying until after it's been said, and its effects have been heard and felt. If I've done that to you, I apologize. And just to set the record straight, I've said a lot of negative things in my time, many of them to people to whom I should have said nothing of the sort. When I'm around people with children, I continually hear parents, teachers, and others telling the kids, good job. And I wonder, I don't know when that got started or where it came from. When I was a kid and did something wrong, I heard about it. When I did something right, nothing was said because that was what was expected of me. So I grew up finding it almost impossible, if not unnecessary, to acknowledge when those around me had done something right. I am learning to say thank you. I'm learning to comment upon good actions or words, but it isn't easy. I'm only 76. I got some time left. I might get a little better. Who knows? And yes, if you've noticed it, I know those last two paragraphs contradict each other. If you can't say something nice, say nothing. And if what happened was what should have happened, nothing needs to be said. I can't explain it. It just is. But that, I guess, is part of what it means to be a complex human being. Moving on from James to the Gospel of Mark. To this point, the Gospel has taken us through what we might call the early years, or perhaps the early months. The Jerusalem Bible calls Mark 1, verses 1 through 13, the prelude to the public ministry of Jesus. This includes the preaching of John the Baptist, the baptism of Jesus, and the temptation in the wilderness. Chapter 1, verse 14 through chapter 7, verse 23 is the Galilean ministry. During this period, Jesus begins to preach, calls various disciples, teaches, cures numerous people, eats with sinners. Crowds begin to follow him. He appoints the 12. His family thinks he is mentally ill. If you don't remember that portion, go back and read it. Jesus begins to teach in parables. He calms a storm. He visits Nazareth and is rejected. He sends the 12 on a mission. He walks on the water. He feeds the 5,000 men, and who knows how many women and children. They weren't worth counting at that point. And he speaks the words about which Pastor Bob preached last week, in which he said that what goes into a person is not what makes a person unclean, but rather it is what comes out of that person. Chapter 7, verse 24 begins the journeys outside of Galilee. Jesus heals the daughter of a Syrophoenician woman, then a deaf man. He feeds 4,000 people. He deals with Pharisees, chides the disciples for their lack of understanding, and cures a blind man at Bethsaida. Now he's traveling outside of Galilee. These travels continue from chapter 7 through chapter 10. In chapters 11 through 13, he conducts the Jerusalem ministry, going back to Jerusalem and being there. Chapters 14 through 16 are the time of passion and resurrection, in the end of the Gospel of Mark. So our scripture today has us at a turning point. Jesus' ministry began among his own people. The more he preached, the more he taught, the wider his ministry spread. Here in this instance, he was far from home, outside of Israel, in a town called Caesarea Philippi, which is situated 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee at the base of Mount Hermon, and is the location of one of the largest springs feeding the Jordan River. This abundant water supply has made the area very fertile and attractive for religious worship. Numerous temples were built at this city in the Hellenistic and Roman periods. Included in those temples were places to worship the god Pan, the half-goat, half-man satyr. Most of us have probably heard someone playing the panpipes. That may be part of the reason that Jesus chose this location for the ensuing conversation. Jesus used words to preach, to teach, to heal, to talk to and with large groups of people. But for now, he was not speaking to the multitudes. He was talking with his disciples. He was not telling them things about themselves. He was asking them about himself. Who do others say that I am? He got various responses like John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. And then he asked, okay, that's what others are saying. But you have been with me from, or at least near, the beginning of my ministry. You have had more opportunity to form an opinion, to see who I really am. So I ask you, with all the time you have spent with me, with all you have heard me say, with all you have seen me do, with all the things we have shared together, what is your judgment of me? Who do you say that I am? We don't really know the full sequence of events at this point. Mark doesn't tell us. Mark tends to leave out a lot of details that might have been put in, but he decides he cuts to the quick where he can. Maybe the disciples' jaws dropped. Maybe they stood stock still, tried to disappear into the scenery. Maybe they realized Jesus was asking them for a commitment, and they weren't ready to commit themselves. Maybe they hoped they could change the subject to something more innocuous, or that if they maintained silence, Jesus himself would change the subject. Maybe someone came up with an answer that Mark did not consider worth recording. Maybe they all looked around, hoping someone else would answer and take the spotlight off them. Or maybe it was all just a split second from the time that Jesus asked the question to the time that Peter answered it. This is the first time that Peter has voiced this answer, at least to Jesus or in Jesus' hearing. But it's obviously not the first time he's thought about it. Peter has been with Jesus since the beginning of his ministry, has heard almost every word Jesus has spoken, has seen almost everything Jesus has done. Peter has the answer. Peter has the courage to speak the truth. Peter says what he knows to be true. Peter has it all right. Depending on whether we are reading from the Greek or from the Hebrew, Peter responds, "You are the Christ," or "You are the Messiah." In other words, in Peter's words, you are the one who will lead the nation Israel to victory over Rome and Israel's other enemies. Peter had it all right, and Peter had it all wrong. What Peter sees as a grand and glorious future, a future of triumph, winning, conquest, elevation to the highest power in the land, clashes with Jesus' understanding that he is called to travel toward Jerusalem, back to the center of his life, and there to be humiliated, scorned, charged, arrested, condemned, to be whipped, lifted up on a cross, to die. When Jesus responds to Peter in this fashion, Peter's response is also instantaneous. How can Jesus be saying such a thing? How can Jesus stand there calmly and shatter Peter's dream? After all, Peter was one of the first to follow Jesus. Peter was drawn to the dream of finding the Messiah, the one who was to come, the one who would deliver Israel from the clutches of its enemies. Peter believed he had found the fulfillment of that dream in Jesus. But sometimes Jesus didn't act or speak according to Peter's plan. Peter dreamed about power, success, and all the trappings which come with them. Unfortunately, Jesus didn't share those dreams. Now and then, Jesus was unwilling to follow closely the outline drawn up by our person, Peter. Sometimes it seemed as though Jesus had an agenda of his own. And just a little while ago, Jesus had rebuked him, Peter, in public. Perhaps Jesus was getting a little too big for his britches. Perhaps it was time to let him know who was really in charge here. Jesus blew it. I mean, he really blew it. Maybe he got up on the wrong side of the blanket that morning. Maybe he was more depressed than usual. Maybe he was acting out his own worst nightmare. What he did was worse than any nightmare Peter had ever had. When Jesus gathered his disciples around him and laid out his vision, it was anything but pretty. Oh, he talked about himself in the third person singular, called himself the Son of Man, which means different things at different times. But clearly, he was talking about himself. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. No, 1,000 times no, Peter said. That simply could not be. Let me do a little projection here. Mark tells us that Peter grabbed Jesus, took him aside for some hurried, in-depth counseling, and let him have it, right between the eyes, and then up one side and down the other. We don't know exactly what Peter said, but I'll bet it went something like this. Jesus, as your best friend and longtime companion, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you really blew it. This is no way to win friends and influence people. This is no way to get people to jump on the bandwagon. It is simply unacceptable to say that you will suffer, be rejected, and executed. If you want worldwide approval, the least you must do is predict a quick victory with minimum casualties and light collateral damage. Even that is negative. Nobody wants to hear about light at the end of the tunnel. They don't even want to know anything about a tunnel. They want to know how they can protect their investments, be prosperous, and have a long and carefree life followed at its end by appropriate recognition from God for all their good deeds. The only good thing about what you said is that you kept it confidential. You didn't spread the word around. That would have been a much bigger mistake. I beg of you, I implore you, I caution you, change your tactics immediately. Let's have no more gloom and doom. Let's have peace and prosperity. Are you reading me loud and clear? Do you understand me, Jesus? We all know what happened next. Jesus, humbled and chastened by Peter's words of wisdom, recanted his own predictions, called upon the crowds to follow him, threw the Pharisees and the Sadducees out of the temple, threw the Romans out of Israel, and established what has existed until today as a great nation state. Well, no, not really. He rebuked Peter once again, called him Satan, his worst enemy, then went public by standing in front of the great crowd which had gathered and saying, "A little while ago, I told my followers it was my lot to suffer, be rejected, die, and rise again. What is true of me is true of my followers as well. If you want to follow me, if you want to be my disciples, you must be ready for the same fate." And a collective gulp was heard. Some scoffed, some laughed, some turned and ran hard for the nearest exit. And some said, "He's bluffing. When push comes to shove, he'll back down and find another way of doing things." Few, if any, wanted to take him seriously. Few, if any, immediately enlisted in his cause, forsaking everything to follow him. Few, if any, were willing to pay the price of commitment. Jesus' stance at that point made it difficult for those around him to take him seriously. It still does. As one preacher said, you can't preach the cross to the people. They've got enough other problems already. I suggest that if we are to have any possibility of becoming followers of Jesus Christ, we must know the cost of discipleship. Jesus looked beyond the cross to final victory, but we must not become so interested in that victory that we ignore the only path to it. If we will be followers of Jesus Christ, we must be ready to bear our own crosses. This is difficult. We have been taught that survival is foremost and utmost, and this totally contradicts that teaching. We may want to take a stand on the issue, but we consider the cost involved and decide it's not worth it. Every time we come, the next compromise becomes that much easier. Every time we protect our security, the next protection seems that much more reasonable. We turn deaf ears to Jesus' words, "For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life?" The same question can be, must be, asked of churches as well as of the individuals who compose them. The answers are not always clear. This church, for instance, is always in the midst of financial needs of its own. We struggle with paying salaries, maintenance bills, regular monthly expenditures, and other administrative costs, annual conference apportionments. We raise funds for a new roof, maybe a new copier or a better computer, or to repair a water leak in the men's room wall. All things we have excellent reasons for doing. Sometimes we get so involved in maintaining our building that it becomes extremely difficult to remember that at least part of our purpose in being a church is to be in mission, to be in service. Sometimes keeping the administrative machinery in place becomes the goal instead of the methodology. These are not easy questions, and there are no easy answers. Does Jesus call us to a life of endless suffering, of defeat, and finally of death? Does he suggest that the worst pessimist is still far too optimistic? Does he call us to meekly submit to the powers that be? It might seem so at first reading, but the reality is almost exactly the reciprocal. The gospel tells us that God is with us, that when we follow Jesus, Jesus will be with us whatever betides, that life in Jesus Christ is worth whatever it costs in the meantime. Indeed, Jesus tells his followers that no other way of living is worth living. How this becomes a reality for each of us is different for each of us. Jesus' message here is not really about how we die our deaths, but about how we live our lives. It is about what we see as important. It is about our orientation to life. It is about a glorious life with him, just not glorious in the way the world generally sees glory. Do you want to know that your life has meaning, has importance? Any better way to find those things in your life than the way of following Jesus Christ? There's a quotation on this next slide to consider. It reads, "The mark of a great church is not how many come, but how many people live differently for having been there." Jesus said, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? What does that mean for you? Consider it well. Amen. Our benediction is one that was spoken by Bishop Woody White at the General Conference in 1996 in Denver. When I first read it, I said, I don't like this at all. But then as I read it over, I realized it had a lot to say. I hope you find the same. And now, may the Lord torment you. May the Lord keep before you the faces of the hungry, the lonely, the rejected, and the despised. May the Lord afflict you with pain for the hurt, the wounded, the oppressed, the abused, the victims of violence. May God grace you with agony, a burning thirst for justice and righteousness. May the Lord give you courage and strength and compassion to make ours a better world, to make your community a better community, to make your church a better church. And may you do your best to make it so. And after you have done your best, may the Lord grant you peace. Amen.
be remembering God's family, living in harmony after the music ends.